Hey everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Design Cinema, the podcast edition. This is Feng Zhu speaking on a Friday before a holiday weekend. Here in Asia, they are celebrating Chinese New Year's, so it is a big holiday here, very similar to the Christmas of the United States, in which everybody gets many days off from work. In places like China, I believe they get about a week or two off, so it's a very long holiday. In Singapore, we have about 4 days off, and I look forward to using these days to catch up on work, as well as maybe play a couple of video games that are releasing this weekend. But I think that's a good leading into today's topic, which is money. Because in Chinese New Year's, there's a saying that they blast in all the radios and whatever supermarkets you go to, it's just on this repetitive mode, which roughly translates into Happy New Year and wish you fortune in the year ahead. So that brings up money. Money plays a major role in everyone's lives. Even though we talk about concept art and all the techniques and how to break into this business and portfolios and so forth, at the end of the day, we need the other side of it, which is you have to earn a living doing this. It's great to have a passion. It's great to want to do this and do something you love. That's all great. But at the end of the day, in the reality of things, we have bills to pay. We have houses, we have mortgages, we have families to raise. So money is important. However, it is a topic that's hard to find information on. Even me doing some research, the numbers I get are sort of all over the place, depending on what sources you're looking at, who you're talking to. So this episode, actually, it's no different because you're getting it from me. So don't take everything as I say here. This is coming from my personal experience. And we'll get to that in a second here as well. But yeah, money is a sticky situation. I personally don't care for it too much. I love what I do, but I do also understand the money side of it. Being an entrepreneur and a business owner, I have come full circle in terms of my starting out as an artist and eventually ending up as running studios. So it is a vital part of this business. And hopefully this episode will clear up some of the questions maybe some of the junior artists out there have. A couple of disclaimers before I get started. One is that I'll be discussing this using US rates and US currency, mostly due to the fact that my experience is about 95% of it in the States. I've worked with clients in Europe and Asia and so forth, but most of the rates are always calculated using US rates. This has to do with many things, actually, because in the States, the entertainment industry is pretty mature. I think ever since Star Wars, the 1970s version came out, the industry has been growing pretty fast in both films and games. And concept design has really matured in the last 20, maybe 25 years or so in the States. So rates are pretty balanced. The market always balances the kind of stuff out. Now, if you go to a different country, the rates are everywhere. And I really mean everywhere. You could get the highest rates, you could get the lowest rates. It just depends on which country you're at. And this has to do with a few things. One, the cost of living in a particular country. If you go to a place that's just on average inexpensive to live at, everything is sort of inexpensive, well, the rates are going to be lower. Another will be the average salary of everyone in that country. And of course, the biggest one, something I just mentioned, is the state of the industry. Entertainment is I like to say, a luxurious type of industry. It is not something a country does when it's still trying to struggle to get itself into the financial state and get it high up there in the world ranking. So games and stuff are generally done when a country has achieved a certain balance of, GDP and things like that. So the United States, again, has been maturing, but in other countries, it is still maturing. It is going through a arc. So the rates are different. And in particular, it has to do with even recognizing what concept artists do. For example, in Asia, you could run into a company in which concept artists and illustrators are working side by side, all under either illustration or concept art. It's all mixed together. So the guy might be hired in as a concept artist, but he's doing icons and like portrait drawings. That's not what he does. He's not designing anything, but the job is concept design. Or you have someone who's not a designer asked to design. So it goes all over the place. And as a result, the rates doesn't standardize. The rates fluctuates because these two industries are quite different. The rates are quite different. And we start mixing the job into one, well, there's your problem. And I think this will solve itself probably within the next 5 to 10 years. It'll start to balance out and you'll see the rates all catch up to US rates. Even 10 years ago when I was in China, I had my own studio there for about 3 years, 2006 to 2009. and the rates the employees are getting is about 3 times less than today. So we're talking about 10 years, the rates have grown 3 times. That's a major growth. If you actually consider, for example, you're in the US, in 10 years, your salary tripled. That's a huge growth. So, and they're catching up very quick into US rates. All right, so number 2 will be, I mentioned earlier, this is going to be from my personal experience. I have worked as a junior designer, as a designer, as an art director, as a creative art director, and both full-time as well as freelance. And and I've gone full circle from working for someone to working with people. So this will give you a good insight into everything, I hope. So for this episode, I think it'll run for maybe an hour, maybe less. We'll see. I'm going to start with full-time positions first and get into freelance and eventually leading into movies, which I'll save for last because the film industry is pretty strange. And we'll get to that in a second. All right, so let's jump into this episode. We're going to talk about money. We're going to start with full-time salaries in games. So concept design is a trade skill. Okay, it is not a job you can simply walk into. And as a result, the salary is going to be already at the mid-range. You're not going to get fast food or minimum wage rates for concept art because it is a trade skill. You have to learn this either on your own or through a school. There's a particular set of foundational skills you have to have. And because of that, that raises your salary. So that's number 1. So it's not that bad. If you're listening for the numbers, they're coming. They're going to come later. But I have to set all this up so you can see what these numbers come in at. Okay. Now, if you have no experience whatsoever, but you have the skills, well, you're going to expect a lower offer from companies. Again, we're talking about full-time jobs here. Okay, we'll get to freelance later. Now, if you're high in demand, say you just graduated from school and a lot of companies want to hire you, well, obviously your rates are going to be higher. Next, when companies are offering a salary, they generally have about a $5,000 fluctuation per year, okay, not per month, per year, on that offer. So what that means is if they're offering you, say, $50,000, generally you could probably bump that up about $5,000 more. That is the rate they actually are comfortable hiring you at, but most studios are not going to offer you the number they already have in their heads. They're going to try to go slightly lower to see if you bite. It's because you're a junior artist and they're going to try to minimize their risk, right? They're not doing that to try to save money. For them, it's not that much, but they're trying to minimize risk and a bunch of other things, which I'll bring up in my next topic, which is some big studios, you'd be surprised, offer lower pay than small indie studios. You might be saying, why would they do that, right? Why would a big company like these huge publishers making billions and billions a year actually offer lower pay than a smaller studio? It has to do a lot of things. And I think this episode hopefully will be clear from both sides, right? Because you always hear the evil industry, the evil big giant companies, they screw their employees all the time. Well, they have their side as well. And we'll clarify a little bit. So one is the chances of you not working out is pretty high. Okay, if you're a junior artist, you don't have any experience, the studio is actually taking a huge risk on you. You could get into the studio and not work out within a week. So by them offering a high salary, that can actually set up a precedence of screwing the next company that you work at. Because if they set your salary already high, you could use that pay stub to bump your salary on the next job, even though you got fired from this previous one. So by getting a junior artist in, if you're the first one to hire them, right? If the AAA studio look at the resume like, oh, this is going to be a first job, they want to balance the industry a little bit as well by preventing, for example, offering you a ginormous salary and you don't work out and we just did you a huge favor. So that's one reason. 2, most junior artists will leave that job within a year or 2. I don't think I know any of my friends or any of our students who stays at their first job forever. It's pretty rare. Sometimes they'll stay for 3-4 years, but generally a year or 2 is the maximum amount of time a junior artist stays at a company. This is because they're learning, they are trying things, and they are going to expand and grow and find their interest. And the first studio being their ultimate job is very, very rare. I don't think you guys probably know too many people that also stay at their first job. There are some, obviously, right? There's always people that stay at their first job, but it's pretty rare. So companies know that. And in a way, you are benefiting just as much as they are benefiting from you. So they're doing a trade-off. They're like, look, you're not going to stay here for more than 2 years. We're going to share all these industry secrets with you. We're going to train you on the pipeline. We're going to give you all this, in a sense, education. And they're going to balance that out by offering you a salary that's a little bit lower than the industry. Or not industry, but a little bit lower than what you might be expecting from a big giant studio. Okay, number 3, this job is competitive. If you try to deny the rate or try to get a higher, you got it's like a gambling game at Vegas. You're gonna put on a bluff face, because if you make it too high, they can essentially just turn you down, and the next guy in line will take that job. So because it is competitive, there's only so little jobs, as we mentioned in the previous episode, available. So if you're not playing with their rates, they could simply just skip you and go to somebody else. All right, so that's another reason. And number 4, branding. This is a big one. Okay, why rates are sometimes lower. Because these studios who's been around for quite a while has built up a giant brand, especially the IPs they create. And to let a junior artist touch these brands, essentially is going to give them a giant boost on their next job. Because we just mentioned, right, that the chances of you staying is about 1 to 2 years. So imagine you're a AAA and you have one of the hottest games on the market and you're doing a sequel to it. Well, that's going to be a hot property for anyone to work on. If you can touch that project and you leave that job in 2 years, your salary is going to be quite high. And 2, because the brand is very, very hot, it's going to attract a lot of attention. So therefore, they also have more pool or more artists to pull from the massive amount of resumes that's going to come in for this particular project. So as a result, the rates are going to go lower simply because the project is too big. I'll share with you personal stories throughout this episode, and one of which is in 2001, I got caught up for Star Wars, right? I had a friend working there, art director, and asked if I want to work up at Skywalker Ranch. For me, I didn't even hesitate. It was like a half a second. I was like, yes, I'll work there. I didn't even know what the rates were at all. And I didn't care because it is Star Wars. This brand is so big, and it's something I grew up with. And to have a chance to work on the film itself, right? This is not an offshoot, not an off project. This is the canon of the industry, or the film. So there's no way I'll pass on an opportunity like that. But the rates later, about a few days later, I found out what the rates were. They were about a third of what I was making in Los Angeles. But really, I did not care at all. So for a year and a half, I went up to Skywalker Ranch, worked with George and these guys at a third of the rate I was earning down in LA. But not a single day went by where I thought, oh man, my pay is low. Because that brings up to my final point, which is what I like to call golden tickets, the Willy Wonka, the thing. I think there are a couple projects, or I don't think there are a couple projects in this business that are golden tickets. Meaning that if you touched on these projects, the chances of you not finding work after is almost zero. And these projects are things like Star Wars, Matrix, Lord of the Rings, Blizzard games, maybe even BioWare products. These are major brands that are very, very hard to get on. So if you actually worked on these projects as a concept designer, you're going to be wanted in the business. It's going to be very, very hard to not find work. So as a result, once you touch these projects, your next job, your rate's going to be much, much higher. And this is why studios sometimes offer you lower pay. They'll be like, hey, look, you're touching this major brand, especially if you're a junior artist. You're going to touch this major brand, so we're going to offset that by lowering your rates by a certain percent. And when you leave, don't worry, you make it all that up. And it's absolutely true. So for example, like if you ever work at Blizzard and you want to go work in Korea, for example, most of these studios will all take you. They love Blizzard employees over there. So, and it happens. I have a bunch of friends who left after World of Warcraft and they started their own studio, and their company was funded by Korean investors. So these are golden tickets. And so all those things combined make rates a little bit lower when you're applying for AAA. So don't be surprised if you're applying for these huge studios and the rate they offer you is a little bit lower. You got to think it from their side of the story as well. Okay, let's keep going here about full-time and money. Now, if you're in demand and you have a couple offers, you can also ask for a sign-on bonus. This is pretty typical. So if you have an offer from Studio A and you have an offer from Studio B, well, if Studio A really wants you, they could sweeten the deal slightly with a sign-on bonus. Studios do this to offset the salary because they don't want to increase your salary because that sets it up for year after year after year, right? So instead, they want to do a one-time bonus. So it's like, hey, look, you work for us, we'll give you a $5,000 bonus. Sometimes it could be 10, sometimes even higher, depending on who you're talking to and where you're working for. So this is generally just one-time hit. And so you can ask for that. It'll help, especially if you're a junior artist, an extra $5,000 to $10,000 on the first day of your job is pretty important. So that's one. All right, next, Besides salaries, you will also be offered bonuses and profit sharing. This is only in video games. Okay, later we'll get to movies. This only happens in video games, also in TV, animation, and animation studios such as Disney. But it doesn't happen on feature films. But in a video game studio, it's very typical for them to offer you bonuses and profit sharing. The next one they're going to offer you is going to be stock options. Now, I group these two together because they come with a very fine line of text they got to read on your contract. Studios use these to sweeten the deal, and it could be worth hundreds and thousands of dollars. At my first job at EA, they gave me a lot of shares, a lot. It was a huge amount. And when I looked at it, I go, holy crap, I'm only 19 years old about this stock option with EA. But when you read the fine writing, he actually states that this money cannot be cashed out until usually 2-3 years later after you work for the studio. And 2, you cannot sell all the shares. Don't worry about it too much, but if you don't plan to stay at a studio for too long, these things are not going to eventually cash out for you at all. And when you leave the company, all the shares are forfeited. You have to kind of give it back. You could try to negotiate these kind of things. I think every studio is different, but just be aware of that. It is a nice thing to have. If you're staying at a job for, say, 5-6 years, these bonuses actually do pay off, and they actually could equal to a lot of money. Some companies let you partake on the revenue of the games. So you get a small percent. If the game does certain numbers, you will get money every quarter or every year. And that could be actually quite huge depending on the studio you're at. Next, moving expense. Okay, these things also get covered. If you're working for especially a bigger studio, they might offer you to, when you move from one country to another, they'll pay for your airplane tickets, a certain amount of moving fee. However, the reason why I bring this up is that the money is not given to you. Okay, I know this episode is for junior artists, so these things that if they're offering you, say, we'll give you $5,000 moving fee, they're not giving you the money, so they're basically reimbursing you for that. So be aware of that, because my first job, I didn't know. EA, because I was moving from LA to Austin, and they're like, we give you $5,000 in moving fee. I'm like, oh, great, another $5,000 on top of signing bonus. That's awesome. But when I got there, they're like, no, we don't give you the money. Give us all the receipts. We'll reimburse you up to $5,000. So very different than actually getting the money. All right, so let's actually get to some numbers here. The whole episode is about numbers. Junior designers, okay, with no experience, just straight out of school, you haven't shipped any products. I think the average rate in the US, yearly salary, okay, we're talking about yearly salaries here, it's going to be hovering around $45,000 to about $55,000 a year. It's going to fluctuate depending on where you go, okay? But that's the average, I think, for junior artists, 45 to about 55. My first job at EA, but this is 20 years ago, was actually at 55. So it's kind of weird that the industry hasn't really grown that much in terms of the salary range. I think the high end has grown, but in terms of the entry salary, it's still the same 20 years later, which is quite crazy. Now, if you shipped a couple of products, you have some experience under your belt, say 2-3 years, about 3 years, I think is a good number there. Now you're no longer a junior artist, and the salary is going to start going up. Now you can expect somewhere between about $55,000 to about $75,000 a year. Okay, these things do not include bonuses, by the way. I'm not including those things. So bonuses, stock options, all that kind of stuff, I'm not included. This is just your base yearly salary. Okay, so for a mid-range guy, you're looking at 55 to about 75 in the US. Okay, if you're catching this podcast in the middle, I have to state this is US rates. If you're in a different country, these things don't really apply. It goes really all over the place. You could be at a third of this rate in some countries. You could be at 1/4, 1/5 the rate, depending on which country you're in. So this is US rates. Now, if you go to the high range, okay, you shipped maybe 1 or 2 AAAs or big projects, or even just shipping any products at all, and your portfolio is very strong. You have about 5 to maybe 7 years of experience. Okay, now you're starting looking at about 75 to 95,000 a year salaries. So it's pretty good. You're getting close to about 100 at a high range. You could probably even hit the 100 if you're experienced as a high level concept artist. So pretty good living. Now, the next step will be art directors. So you've done this for 7-8 years. You're a very good leader. You can run a team. The companies will now move you into an art director position. And art directors make a pretty good living. Generally, I think about 95,000 to about 150,000 a year. Pretty average, I think, for art directors. Again, depending on where you work. If you're working in a very small studio and you're a Kickstarter and you're an art director, obviously they don't pay that kind of money. This is generally your AAAs that have a lot of employees and that have the salary in place for many years. So 80 is generally a good point, that kind of number. I think the average is going to be sitting about maybe 120, maybe somewhere around there. Beyond art directors, you have creative art directors, which is the art director's boss. you're generally just one step away from CEO. So, I mean, not being CEO, but you're working directly with the C's in the company, right? Your CFO, CEO, CEOs, and so forth. So creative art directors could pull in quite a bit of money. You're starting definitely over 100K in most cases. I think the average could go for anywhere from 125K to as high as 250, so $250,000. If as a junior artist, you might be hearing these numbers going, that's crazy. That's a lot of number. But it is true. This is the kind of stuff I'm trying to share with you guys. If you have a lot of experience and you're making the IP very, very valuable, these companies will take care of you. There's a reason why these games cost $50-80 million to make. A lot of that goes into salaries. If you actually look at the breakdown of the where does money go, right? Because you always think, oh, this game costs $80 million. Stop to think where that money actually goes to. Most of it, manpower, right? And they're getting expensive manpower. They're not going with $80 million and hire a bunch of junior artists out of a high school. They're going to get the most senior guys they could possibly get, the most experienced 3D artists, the most experienced mocap guys, the most experienced texture artists, everything. And concept artists is part of that. So very good. And especially if you're art director, you're in charge of this $80 million IP, you better be really, really good. And they're going to sweeten your salary to make sure that you're happy doing this job. So yeah, so for creative art directors, you could definitely earn that kind of money. In fact, I've seen much higher. Even from my personal experience, you could get up to the $400,000 to $500,000 range. But now that's a huge asterisk, okay? Very few people earn that, but it is possible because I've seen it. You could earn that kind of money as a creative art director. And if you put bonuses on top, you could even earn more. So that sort of covers it. So just a quick review. Junior artists, we're talking about 45 to 55, mid 55 to about 75, high or experienced, you're talking about 75 to about 95. And art directors, you're generally hovering around 95 to about 150. And creative art directors, anywhere from that or 125 and upwards, depending on where you work and how many years experience you have. And also keep in mind, as art directors and creative art directors, your access to bonuses is generally much higher than the say a junior artist. The percentage is much higher. So, and if you work in a company long enough, you also get big bonuses. Some studios I worked at actually post that directly on the wall. So you get in and say bonuses coming in Christmas. What they do is they actually post up the exact number. Now, this doesn't happen in every studio. They do this to show you that if you stay at the studio longer, you get more money. So, for example, I started a job and I was just there for a few months, and my bonus was basically a gift card because I stayed there for only a few months, right? There's no value, so they give me like a $50 gift card or something. But meanwhile, you're looking at someone who's been there for 8 years. And you can see the math equation right there on the wall. And it's like, oh my goodness, this guy's getting, a $50,000 bonus or $80,000 bonus. So it's an incentive to say like, hey, look, don't quit. Stay here, do stuff for the company, and we'll take care of you. So the length of stay and experience play a major role. So of course, art directors and creative art directors are generally pretty senior, so they can make good salaries. All right, let's jump into freelance rates. Now, this is a big topic because I think a lot of you guys listening to this podcast are going to freelance. And that's going to bring up a massive amount of information here. So let's try to cover that. Rates in freelance vary greatly, and I mean greatly. It depends on a ton of stuff. Now, full-time jobs in the US, they kind of balance themselves out because studios are competitive among themselves. So they will balance out the salaries to be industry standard. But when it comes to freelance, essentially you are your own business. And this is where the rates get all over the freaking place. I mean, really, I've seen crazy numbers in this business from the lowest low to the highest highs. So let's talk about some of the factors that affects your rates. One, experience level. Okay, if you come to this business as a freelancer and you have never actually freelanced or worked for anybody, don't be expecting high rates. There's no way some companies will pay you that. But if you have shipped products, have a lot of experience, well, your rates could be pretty high. Next, do you have a good track record? Okay, freelance depends a lot on word of mouth and recommendations. So if a studio like working with you and they've been with you for a long time, they themselves could bump your rates to a very high number. And they could also recommend you to other studios. For example, a couple of studios I worked at, AAAs, they actually keep something that we call a list. Okay, sometimes you even refer to as the gold list. Gold as in the color or the material gold. This list is a list of freelancers that we keep internally, and art directors write the names of freelancers they work with and recommendations and their rates on this particular paper. And what happens is this list is sitting on the studio server. So if the studio has, say, 8 or 9 locations around the world, they can actually just refer to this list and find freelancers without even looking at their portfolio, because he has all the notes in there. For example, John Smith, right, his rate is this and this. He's very good at this and this, and he's always on time. He's always really doing good. Trust this guy. If you have your name on these kind of lists, your rate's going to be very, very high because these art directors really want to work with you. So having a good track record is important. And the opposite is true. If you have a bad track record, like this guy's always missing deadlines, not following spec, don't use this guy. Well, one, you're probably not going to get a job. Two, the companies that's getting referred to is not going to pay you a very good rate. So you have to have a good track record. Next, the quality, speed, and quantity of your work. Okay, all three is important. The idea is really good. You could do it really fast, and you could do a lot of it. That's also going to earn you very high rates, because the studios rather pay for all three at a higher rate than to pay for, say, really good quality, but you're really, really slow. Well, they're not going to pay you a high rate because it doesn't make sense financially for them. They want to, for example, hire you for only 2-3 days, but get a ton of stuff out of the 2-3 days versus getting the same thing out in, say, 2 weeks, even though the money is exactly the same, right? Because, say, $500 an hour versus $100 an hour for 5 hours, it's the same rate. But time is a major thing in studios because they're always working with deadlines. So if you're fast and good at what you do, they will go for your rates. You could be really good but super slow, and studios are just sometimes hesitant to deal with freelancers that are very, very slow, simply because of time. Next, how important are you in creating brands and IPs? Because freelancers vary greatly. You could be a junior freelancer just providing things they need. For example, in the last episode, we mentioned doing swords and shields, right? We could hire a freelancer to simply give us 50 shields and 50 swords and so forth. But you're not playing a major role in terms of branding the IP. Now, if you're a concept artist who's coming in and you're actually shaping the direction of the entire project, so this entire $80 million game is riding on your designs, while your rate's going to be pretty high because the studio is dependent on you to essentially sell the visuals of this entire game. So, and those kind of concept artists are hard to find. This is something we specialize in. When we're in Los Angeles, and even today, that's what we did. We don't take on jobs like drawing 50 shields and so forth because we have built up the experience. So my job these days is just branding IPs. That's all we do. We get into a studio, they have a script, they have an early idea, and what they want is visualize this. What does it look like? We're going to use your visuals to define this game. So it's a very, very important job. So when you're doing things like that, well, your rate's not going to be very low because the studio understand the importance of that job. They want to take care of you. They also know that you're rare to find. Not too many people could do this kind of stuff. So therefore, you're going to get a higher rate. Next, how high in demand are you? There are freelancers who are very good at certain things they do. So they're in high demand. For example, someone could be really good at drawing futuristic cars, okay, like vehicle design. Hard job to find. If you want someone to come in and draw you believable vehicles that are in the future, for example, like not crazy, just really wild science fiction designs, but vehicles that look somewhat believable and can happen in the future. It's hard to find these positions, right? So if you happen to do that, well, your rates could go pretty high. For example, you guys could look up a couple of guys. In LA, you have Daniel Simon, Harold Belker. These guys specializes in vehicle design. Check out Daniel Simon. Just type Daniel Simon concept artist. You'll find his website. Amazing work, right? And so that guy specializes in vehicle design. So I'm pretty sure he makes pretty good rate as a result of that. And next, followed by that is, do you have a brand? As a concept designer, if you start to brand yourself, okay, not in terms of like commercializing yourself or marketing, but basically your name's starting to resonate within the business. That not only are you bringing them good designs, you're also bringing a sort of a name behind it. For example, Sid Mead, he is a brand. So if you have Sid Mead designing a project, you could actually use his name as part of the marketing. If you have Daniel Simon designing vehicles for your movie, you could use him because these are branded designers. They're very good at what they do, and they didn't start out by branding themselves. It's just that they're very good, they're recognized, and their names become known by the business. These things sometimes studios will hire you simply for the branding as well, because you are good, but the branding helps. I've been on projects in which they're bringing you in to kind of just make the team really, really happy. They're like, hey, cool, this guy's working with us. I've had friends do that kind of stuff. They'll get into a studio for 2 weeks and they're sort of the recognized name. So the morale boost for the studio as well works really well because all the concept artists are like, oh, cool, I'm working with this guy and this guy. So that plays a role as well in terms of your rates. Okay, so those are some of the factors that plays a role in terms of your low and high in freelance rates. Okay, now let's go to the next point here. Games and films are very different. Okay, I'm going to get to films in a second because freelance, we are both working in rates, okay, but they vary. In concept design, it's very rare to charge per piece. Okay, my studio does not do it, and most studios probably doesn't do it either. The reason why we don't charge per piece is because charge per piece is a very illustration term. It is buying a piece of art. For example, you're doing a cover for a magazine. How much do you charge for that cover? You're doing a painting for a client. How much do you charge for that painting? In concept design, we are paying for an idea. You can't put a number on the idea. Some ideas could take you a single sketch in 5 minutes could capture a beautiful idea. For example, the helmet in Gladiator, the one with the little teardrop that Maximus fights. I think that helmet was drawn by either Ridley Scott or Sylvain, his concept artist, on a napkin. That probably took about 5 minutes to draw, right? But it's a great design. Versus some designs could take years. I've been on movies in which a design has been going in and out of design for close to a year, sometimes a year and a half. So if you put a number on it, it makes no sense. For example, we want a design for the Gladiator mask. How much do you charge per design? Well, what if design takes a year to do? And at the end of the day, you have one drawing. Like, okay, that's the final one. That's the final design, even though you're working a year on this thing. Okay, here's your money for that one drawing. It makes no sense. So concept designers, we charge per time. And clients who are in this business long enough, they understand that. They know that some designs take long, some take short, and hopefully balances out. And as a professional, we're not going to try to drag the time out. We're not be like, oh, because we're paid by time, let's just work as slow as possible. Because if you do that, you're also not going to be on the job very long. The clients will figure out that you're not hitting the design fast enough, and they'll just move on to somebody else. So it's a fine balance between trying to find the design and how long it takes to do so. You can't rush it too fast either. Then you get designs that are not so good. But it comes down to rates, okay? And we generally charge per day. Sometimes you could do hour, but generally per day, because you could break down a day into hours, I guess. And that is very, very standard. So if you're working for the studio and they're hiring you as a concept designer, but they want to charge per piece, be a little careful with those kind of things, because you could get yourself in a very sticky situation in which they're like, let's design the main character of this game, and we're going to pay you per piece. And the fine writing will be like, until it is picked, until it is final, we don't pay. So let's start drawing. So you give them 5 roughs. They're like, no, we like number 1. Okay, then you clean up number 1. Okay, that's good. Add this, change that. You do those. Okay, let's change the hair color to this. Let's add this weapon to this back. Let's change this. Good. And now you're like 2 weeks into this project. And they're like, in the day, we don't think this design's work. Let's start from 0. In the meantime, they don't have to pay you because you agreed to per piece once it's chosen. So if the client don't choose anything for 2-3 weeks or a month, you don't get paid. So that's why we always go by day rates. Okay, so and that is a risk by both sides because clients have to pay you no matter what. All right, I've been on projects in which 2-3 weeks nothing's getting picked. It is not the fault of anyone. It's that this design's hard to get to. So you could be working on it for 2 weeks, but you're still getting paid because you are working. It's not like we're not doing anything all day. We're trying to give them designs, but designs not hitting the mark or certain clients don't like it. And it'll keep rolling. And this is kind of the things that clients are prepared to do. Every time I hire concept artists, it is essentially a risk. We agree to a rate and we're paying them for essentially something we haven't even seen. It is a very bizarre business. We're paying you for an idea. So you're like, okay, give us this cool landscape for the next fantasy game. We don't know what we're going to get, but in a week, we're going to see it. And no matter if it's good or bad, the freelancer is going to make his money, no matter what. So you could see something that doesn't work and you still have to pay. That's just the nature of the business. So of course, that's where earlier I brought up the experience of someone. If you're very experienced, you've been doing IPs for a long time, well, the risk goes down because if I pay you for a week, what I get back on Friday, most likely it's going to hit the mark. So that's all I have to do with experience. All right, next, remember, we are not providing finished art. We are here to provide ideas, right? So if you have good ideas, you could do it fast, then you could do really, really well in this business. And all I got to do is render it to a certain quality. Depends on what studio, but once you're on a project long enough, the quality of the art could actually start going down because once you're in the heat of production, say you're 6 months into a project, the clients know that you could draw really good stuff, right? They could go to your blog and see that you could draw really good stuff. But when in the heat of production, the longer a project goes, the less they're going to start caring about the quality and the more they're going to want stuff. So you'll see drawings, sketches, and rough start to show up. But the rate is still the same because they understand that it all comes down to the idea itself. Okay, next, are you an individual or a registered company such as an LLC? Let me take a drink real quick. Man, went for 35 minutes without taking a drink. My throat is about to die here. Okay, so I mentioned an individual versus LLC because this plays a small difference in terms of your rates. An individual, you can only command a certain rate, but as a company, because you're representing maybe perhaps more than one person, your rates could be higher. And company also has higher overheads. So this is something I mentioned in the GDC episode. If you watch that episode, I can't remember which number that was, but on the back, there were some tips about setting up a freelance company, and it's mentioned there. So, but it does affect your rates. So if you're representing, say, yourself versus like you have Studio X, well, Studio X could command a higher rate. And there's a lot of factors that goes with that, and you should probably watch the Design Cinema as to why the rates are higher. Okay, next, let's talk about the rates. Okay, let's actually talk about the real numbers here. So just like the full-time one, let's get to the numbers. Now, for a junior artist, okay, starting out, no experience, freelance, in the US, okay, using US rates, you're looking somewhere at 300 to about 450 a day. That's your rate. You could, again, this is not standardized. You could be lower than that. You could be at 150 or 200, but I think the average, you're looking at about 300 to about 450 a day. In the mid-level, you got some experience, you worked with a couple studios, your rate's going to start to go into the 450s to about 750 a day, okay, for mid-range. You have done a few games, you have shipped a couple of products, you're very reliable, you're starting to make IPs that are very recognizable, you're very good at this kind of stuff. Well, your rate's going to go somewhere between $750 to about $1,000 a day. Now, if you're a super pro, but this only happens to a very small handful of concept designers out there, but they do exist, okay, but it's a very small number. You could go up to about 1,000 to about 1,500 a day, or even higher. But 1,500, I think, is about the cap, as most studios are willing to pay. You go higher than 1,500 a day, it's going to be pretty hard to land clients. But that's for the super pros out there, guys who are, like I mentioned earlier, they hire you in to brand IPs. That is your job, to really help the studio shape. So that's kind of the typical rates, I think, in terms of my experience, of what those numbers are. And you might be asking, why is freelance rates so much higher than full-time? Because if you do the math on that, like a guy making $1,000 a day, he's making 30 grand a month, right? So you do that by 10, he's making 300,000 a year. You might be asking, why is it so high? Well, here are the factors. One, freelance is not consistent. Okay, it comes and goes. So that rate that you're getting, say you're getting 1,000 a day, that's not for 365 days. That could be only for 2 days, right? So on some projects, I literally come in for 1 day a week because one, I'm too busy to take them on. And two, if you're at a high rate, these studios sometimes will mitigate that by giving you lower days. Like, okay, that's your rate, then we can only hire you for 2 days a week. So don't think of it as this is your 365 days rate. This is per day rate, and that day can only last on a project. You could be on for 3 days, you could be on for a week. If you're lucky at those rates, you could be on for a few months. So freelance is not consistent, and therefore the higher rate in a way protects us as well. Okay, and also in freelance, there are no bonuses, there are no profit sharing, there's no stock options. So in a full-time position, you might be earning less, but a full-time position is more stable, and you get all those perks that come to the job. A freelancer has none of that. You just basically get the pay, and that's it. And the next one, why the rates are much higher, is because freelancers get the cash up front and they don't get anything deducted in terms of tax. So taxes in the States could eat anywhere from 20 to 30% of your earnings. So freelance have to add that on top of their rates because 30% of the money will be gone. So if you're making $100, $30 will go to the government. So whereas a full-time job, they deduct that from your paycheck. So you might be making say a certain amount a month. By the time you get your check, it's already being deducted. So these things are offsets in terms of why freelancers generally make more money. But the biggest one is because it fluctuates. And I want to bring that up because if you're looking for a full-time job and you've been freelancing, you cannot use your freelance rates to justify your full-time job unless you could prove that you're working 365 days a week, a year, getting those rates. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense because I had that happen in the past where we hire someone and they go, oh, this is my rate. I'm like, wow, that's what you earn? Well, that's my freelance rate. I go, how many months were you on this project at this rate? I was on it for about 2 weeks. So you're using a 2-week rate to justify your entire year's payout. I go, if you could keep that 2-week rate going for 365 days a year, then sure. But most freelancers don't do that. So be aware of that, right? You can't use these rates like you make $700 a day or $1,000 a day and then you times that by 30 and times that by 12. That's pretty rare. You're not going to do that. Okay, now in general, freelance pays better than full-time. Okay, that's just in general because the rates are higher And the big bonus on top of that is that you could take on many freelance jobs. Okay, this is the big caveat here. In full-time positions, you're too tired. Some studios allow you to freelance while you're on full-time. But even so, you're pretty tired, and when you get home, you get into the kind of zone of like getting off work and you don't want to do any other work. You can, but the mood is different. Versus as a freelancer, you could take on 2 to 3 jobs at a time. If you're crazy, you could take on like 5. For myself, between 2001 to about 2006, I was heavily freelancing. I'm talking about just massive amounts of freelance, killing myself doing it in the process, in which I'll take minimum of 3 jobs at one time, sometimes go as far as 5. This is just something I enjoy doing because at that time, there's just so much freelance work available and I didn't want to turn anything down. So that was what I was doing. I was just trying to take as many jobs as I can. I even had a time in which I was vacationing in Hawaii. I just got into Maui. I think it was Maui. Yeah, it was Maui. I just checked into the hotel, put my bags down, plugged the laptop in to check email real quick, which you shouldn't do when you're on vacation, but I checked email, and boom, a client of mine from Japan, because they're on very similar time zones, sent an email asking if they could get a couple of designs. And this was a long-time client of mine. I really like working with them. I didn't want to tell them that I'm not available for 6 days or something like that. So I was like, okay, I could do your job. And luckily, I brought a tiny Wacom. You know, the tiny one? I don't even know they make it today, but they have these little baby Wacom they made a long time ago. They're still Intuos, but they're really small. And I had a tiny laptop that wasn't meant for work. It was a 13-inch Sony laptop. It was one of those tiny little laptops. But Photoshop was in it. So here I am in Maui, just landed, and I'm sitting in the hotel, in a nice beach resort, doing freelance work on a tiny 13-inch. The screen itself is probably only like 11 inches wide, using a really slow version of Photoshop. This laptop doesn't even run on like Pentium chips, whatever it was back in the days. It was running on some mobile chip. It was so slow. But that's the kind of stuff I was doing. I so love freelance that I was doing it even when I was on vacation. Looking back, I probably shouldn't have done it, but it's like a client of mine. So with that said, if you're a freelancer, right, and you could take on multiple gigs, your earning powers could be pretty high. Even as a junior artist, you might earn more than a full-time junior artist at a job. So I think a prolific freelancer, right, someone who's actively working, taking on clients pretty much on a daily basis, you could earn probably somewhere between 150 to about 300,000 a year. Okay, the 300,000 being a pretty rare number. The high individuals will definitely pull that number in. It's not a problem. But I think your average salary is pretty high. You're getting about 150 to about 300. If you're very prolific, you're working with high profile clients, you're always in demand, you have a name for yourself, you're doing cool projects, you can actually get up into the 400, 500,000 a year salary range. For those listening who are young, this might be the first time you're hearing these numbers and you'd be like, holy crap, concept art can make a lot of money. You can, okay? But you have to be really, really good at this business, and you have to have a recognized brand sort of in what you do. Otherwise, it's pretty average, right? But still higher than the normal. But yes, you can earn a pretty good living doing this. And that's what I want to share with you on this episode. It's like, look, concept art's fun, but from the outside world, they might think it's pretty geeky, like it's a pretty nerdy thing to do. But look, the earning power behind it is massive if you do well, right? So, I'm talking about you pulling that kind of number in a year. So if you do this for several years or 10 years, you could be pretty financially stable. And that's what also led me to do entrepreneurship, because during those crazy freelance years from 2001 to 06, that's what I was doing. I was just recruiting savings, and I was using that to then eventually start the companies that I have today. By the way, I'm not using this to boast or show off or do anything. This is purely information. You guys probably know me well enough now that that's not my character, which is to show off and boost and all that kind of stuff. My job here is to teach you guys. So, and part of that is doing this. So yeah, so that's why I was freelancing like mad, just because if the jobs are coming in, I did not want to turn them down. The rates were good, these jobs were good, so I was just recruiting that type of savings. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have the businesses I have today. Okay. All right, so let's go into freelance for films. Earlier, we're talking about games. Now, for films, the rates are pretty similar, but there's some caveat to that. So let's get to this, because this is also something that doesn't get mentioned. Now, we're getting to 46 minutes. It's going to run a little long, but let's keep going here. So for films, number one, companies like Paramount, Fox, Warner Brothers, okay, these are not, they don't make films, okay? I know that they're film companies, but they don't make movies. They're essentially banks. They're investors, okay? These studios are publishers. The same thing like EA is a publisher, and a bunch of companies work for them, or they're working underneath EA to make games. Like BioWare makes games and EA publishes it. Well, the movie industry is the same thing. So Warner Brothers publishes movies and Paramount publishes movies. So that means smaller studios actually make the films. But these studios don't advertise themselves as much as film studios, as much as game studios do. Like most of you guys probably know Bethesda and Rocksteady and things like that, right? They make games. But on the film side, most of you guys probably don't know like Lightstorm, Bay Films, right? They're the ones making Titanic and making Transformers. They're a little bit smaller studio, but they're massive in scale, but they're smaller in terms of name recognition. They don't put themselves out there. This is generally the second logo you see on the film. So you watch a movie, the Warner Brothers logo show up, and then there'll be some other logo. So the other logo is the one actually making the film. So why do I mention that? It's because it's nowhere to send a portfolio. That's the problem. You cannot send a portfolio to Warner Brothers. You can't send a portfolio to Paramount. There's no place for you to send it. And these smaller studios, because they're often hidden, you can't send anything to them as well. And on top of that, lots of times on a major feature film, they'll actually set up a separate studio just for this movie. And when the movie is done, in terms of pre-production, all the VFX are done, they actually shut these studios down. I think it's done for legal purposes. So if the film gets sued for a particular reason, the company that made it actually is gone. So I think it has something to do with that. It probably has to do with taxes as well. But when I was working on movies in LA, you actually go to these places, they're just literally a hole in the wall to find some industrial park somewhere that's being abandoned, turn it back on for like 6 months. You're going to like offices that has no walls, that has no paint, like pretty rundown places. Happens a lot. It's because these studios are temporary. You work there, you work on the film, and then boom, the thing is like reset to a post-apocalyptic state after you finish with the movie. Pretty typical. So that makes it very hard for junior artists to apply for these jobs because where do you send your portfolio to? Unlike a game studio like Bethesda is there, Blizzard, they're there. You can send stuff there. So that makes it pretty hard. And that's why I mentioned that. It's like working in games is quite easy to get in. You just send your portfolio to somebody and boom, you're there. For films, you have to talk about how to actually get yourself in it. Next, which is the very big factor, is that almost all your major blockbuster movies are union. Okay, they're unionized movies. And this union essentially is acting like as your employer. Okay, for a full-time position, the company takes care of you. But movies, because they're project-based, everyone who's on films freelances. That includes your producers and directors, right? Everyone essentially is a freelancer. You get onto these projects, onto a movie, they could employ somewhere in maybe thousands of people. But once the film is done, everybody's off the project, everybody. So essentially, we're all freelancers if you're working in films. So the union was essentially set up to protect the freelancers, to give them representation, to give them protection about competition, to protect your rates. They also offer you health benefits and vacation days and all these kind of things you build up through the union. So the union in LA, the illustrators union, doesn't have too many people in it. And it's a very, very hard union to get into. The process is probably too long to talk about here. But essentially, the way that most people get into the union in Los Angeles is one, you have to be in LA. That's almost, you have to. Okay, if you want to work in Hollywood films like Iron Man, things like that, you have to get yourself into Los Angeles. Number two, you have to know production designers, directors, or friends of yours who are working on these movies, friends who are in the art department itself. Okay, you have to befriend them, know them, and what they could do is they can look at your portfolio and bring your portfolio in to show the directors. Now, if you know the directors personally, that helps greatly because they could bring you in on a film without going through any kind of loops. So, production designer, same thing. Basically, you got to get this portfolio in front of a director. There's just nowhere to send this stuff in. For the films I worked on, it all worked that way. Even for Star Wars, I was at the art director's birthday party, actually, and he asked me if I want to work on Star Wars. I go, okay. And basically, I passed my portfolio to him. He brought it up to the ranch, showed it to George, and that's generally how it works. Same thing with Transformers and so forth. Same thing. So now you're working on the film, but you are not working on the union film. So let me explain that real quick. So what happens is most film studios are made by, say, Bay Films or Lightstorm. Okay, Lightstorm is James Cameron's company. In the early phases of pre-production, these films are not union. Okay, they're independent. So like Bay Films is Bay Films. So you get a paycheck for Bay Films. So during this process, you got about a 6-month period in which he could work with anyone he wants. He doesn't have to necessarily work with union people. But once the film is picked up by, say, Warner Brothers or Paramount, this film will now go union. Okay, so now if you're someone who never heard this before, let me just repeat this process real quick. Films that are in Hollywood, majority of them, okay, your Iron Mans, your Transformers and so forth, these are all what we call union films. And to work on a union film, you have to be in the union itself. So if you're a concept artist and you're not in the union, you cannot work on union movies. So what I was talking about earlier is basically for the first 6 months or so, if you happen to know, say, Michael Bay or some director, you could work with him before the film is turned union. He could work with anyone he wants. He could work with non-union people. But what happens is when the film goes union, now the paycheck is coming from Paramount. Okay, they're now financially funding this movie. They will turn the film union. And this is where most people get into the union, what we call grandfathering in. So at this point, the director could write a letter to the union or make a phone call saying, hey, so-and-so on this team plays a major contribution to this movie. And because it's not union, when the film now goes union, he's going to be off the project. However, losing this designer could be very, very detrimental to this project. So we'd like to request this particular person to be accepted into the union. And that doesn't guarantee you that you get into a union, but it is one of the probably the easiest ways, at least for all the friends I know, that is the way they got into the union, which is all from grandfathering. So once you grandfather in, then you're in. Then you pay your union fees, your dues, you get your credit on the movie, and boom, you're on the union now. So, but otherwise, it's really hard to get in. There just isn't one. So if you're starting out, I definitely recommend you guys to do some freelance, do some games, get your experience in the door, start to know people. And if you really want to work on Hollywood movies, then slowly get yourself into Los Angeles and know these production designers, know some directors, go to some of these meetings they have sometimes. And that really is I think in my opinion, the only way in. I just don't know anything else. Unless you have family members or something that happen to be in the union or running the show, it's very hard to get in. Now, once you're in though, it's really good because a union, because it's a small group of people, they will protect your rates. So union rates are generally higher than what the outside rates are. And you're going to look at the high range of the freelance rates I mentioned earlier, right? The high to the super high rates. And that's what a union operates at because the number of members in the union is really, really low. I think when I was in LA, 2006 or so, I think it was 150 or so members. And of that, concept artists only consisted of maybe 50 of those people. The rest were storyboard artists, which are in the same union as well. So in terms of designers, that's it. And the thing is, when you're a union movie, you can only hire union designers. So if you happen to be a very, very good union designer, you get your picks for every single film. So I've known friends of mine who works on every major Hollywood film simply because they're very, very good at it. 2, they're high on the list of the union list. And 3, because they're union, these films have to work with these designers. So being it gives you a huge advantage. But again, it's hard to get in. There are some films that are not union. Actually, right now, Star Wars, essentially, I think it might be because it's bought by Disney. But when I worked on Star Wars, it wasn't. I think Star Wars at the time was the biggest funded indie film in the world because George is not union. He works up at Skywalker. He owns Lucasfilm himself. And he funds these films himself. So Star Wars actually paid, I think, by himself. Fox distributes the film, but doesn't fund it. So in a way, Star Wars is an indie movie. So that's why anyone can work on Star Wars. You don't have to be in union. But now since they got bought by Disney, I'm not sure exactly how that works. Okay, now, if you want to work on movies really bad, there are other ways in besides going to union. Some loopholes, I guess, in a way. So I'll give you some tips. One is you work for a VFX studio, okay, such as Industrial Light and Magic, Weta, Double Negative, right, Rhythm Hughes. There's a lot of studios that work on films, but they don't work on them directly. As a designer, right? They're a VFX house, so they provide the CG effects and so forth. Like IOM did all the effects mostly for The Force Awakens. So if you work there, you can essentially work on these films as well. But if it's a union film such as Avatar, for example, you might not get to do the what we call the A-level stuff, which is like designing the main character, designing the main spaceships and so forth. Those will be done by the LA guys. So if you're working at Weta and the Weta is doing the VFX for Avatar 2, then you might do some stuff that the union guys didn't do. For example, there might be an interior of a Na'vi house, okay, and the LA guys only did exterior. They haven't done the interior. So that concept is missing, but the shot requires it. So you can work on those type of particular things. So you might not get the biggest shots in the film or the designs, but you get to work on these movies. And by doing so, you start to meet the right people and you can work yourself into the union that way. And I've seen a lot of my friends get into the union this way as well. It's just a little bit easier because IOM, Weta, Double Negative, they don't have these kind of union requirements. You just apply to a job and they have physical locations unlike a film studio. So you can actually get yourself into them. Another one is that you can start a studio yourself. You could start a studio, and in a film, when they contract to other studios, they could bypass the union thing as well. Basically, you're a studio providing a special service. For example, you do motion capture, you do previs, you do storyboarding or something like that. If you provide a special service, you could bypass the union a little bit as well. It's the same thing how IOM works on the films. Basically providing as a company versus an individual, and the union only applies to individuals. So that's another way in. Another thing is you can work for TV animation studios such as DreamWorks or Disney, who also makes films, right? And they have their own union, but I'm pretty sure you get into them automatically. So don't quote me on that because I haven't worked for Disney or DreamWorks full-time. I've only done freelance for them. But I think if you work for Disney and DreamWorks full-time, you're automatically in their own union because they're so big. Something like Disney is so massive. They basically have their own union. And the union does the same thing the union in LA does, which is protect their artists. Because Disney is also project-based, even though they're a giant company. When they make a movie like Frozen or something, that is also a project. So they might bring on 400, 500 people for a project. And when it's done, they'll let everybody go with the asterisk attached to letting you go. They're not actually letting you go forever. They're basically saying, look, we're letting you go. And for the next 3 months, we don't know what you're doing. But when the film comes back, like say we're doing Frozen 2 or something, you have first priority onto this project because you worked for us before. And we're only letting you go because there's nothing for you to do. So the union, in a way, protects you during those off times. They give you the health benefits. They give you the dental and all that kind of stuff. And maybe for your 401k and so forth. So they have their own. Another way is to work with film studios that are not in the US. There are plenty of movies being done in Europe, in Asia, and the rest of the world, and they're not under any kind of union. So you can work freely with them and don't have to worry about anything in terms of union. That's what I did recently. I worked on a film that's coming out of Europe, and there's no union at all. You just work with directors, and you can bring on anyone you want. They don't care at all. Same thing with China. This is what my new film production company is. I mentioned a few episodes back that I started a new company. It's actually a film production company. So we are basically set up to handle these IPs that are coming out of other countries besides the US, because a lot of people want to get into the Hollywood game, and they already are. All right, so before we wrap this episode up, I'm going to give you guys some tips, mostly for freelancers, okay? So this is going to be the last section here. Bunch of tips for freelancers. 1, track your invoices really carefully, okay? Or get someone to do it. Artists, we're really bad at this kind of stuff, okay? We like to draw, we like to design, and the last thing we want to do is be in an Excel sheet managing schedules and money and invoices. So if you're not good at it, what happens is you actually could forget billing your clients. Clients are not going to remind you. Trust me on this, man. I don't think I ever worked in this business in which if you don't invoice someone, they actually remind you to invoice them. If you don't invoice them, they're not going to remind you, and that the period of invoice is going to expire, and they essentially don't have to pay you. So no one's going to remind you. So make sure you're very diligent on this kind of stuff, or again, get somebody who's good at it to manage your invoices. Okay, don't forget to send your bills in, because remember, for freelancing, you generally don't get paid every single day, even though you're operating at a day rate. You sum that stuff up. So you can actually work for 3 months and get paid at the end of that 3 months. And during the 3 months, you actually get nothing. And it's up to you on how you want to structure that pay scale. But imagine you forget to bill them. And I have done that before, in which I have totally forgot to bill a client at the end of it and lose out on potentially quite a bit of money. Number 2, which I just mentioned, studios don't pay immediately, so recognize that. So make sure you save some of your money for your operations, because some studios could go as long as 60 days after they get the invoice before they pay you. So you bill them in January, they don't have to pay you till March, essentially. So if you're depending on every single penny to survive, you gotta prepare for that the money doesn't come in right away. Number 3, don't spend all your money at once. Remember, if you freelance, 20 to 30% of that will go to taxes. Okay, so if you get $100, don't go spending that. You gotta save away at least 30% of that, because it's gonna go to the federal government. Again, in the States, the tax rates are much lower in certain countries and so forth, but in the States, the rate is somewhere around that. So don't go spending it. And 2, I could add in the second point here. On top of the taxes is that you can actually write off a lot of stuff as a freelancer. Okay, so talk to a CPA, someone who does this for a living, especially a CPA who has worked with entertainment designers in Hollywood. They get it, okay? Because you're freelancing, you're essentially your own business, and you can write off a lot of stuff. You can claim it against your taxes, okay? Therefore, reducing your tax that you have to pay. So, for example, you buy a new computer, you buy a Wacom tablet, you subscribe to magazines, even if you go on vacations. These are all things that could benefit your job. So therefore, you can write them off. Okay, so even if you buy a car, if you use it to meet clients, you could write off the car. You can write off if you're renting an apartment or a house or a place for an office. You could write all that stuff off because that is your job. If you're working at home, and I think more than 50% of your house is dedicated to your work, you could write off the mortgage on the house and all sorts of stuff. Okay, but check with the CPA. They'll tell you exactly what you can and cannot write off. And for me, it was a huge benefit because, again, I was freelancing full-time pretty much. And for those years, the tax was just crazy. And having a good CPA, they can offset that greatly for you. Okay. Next one, which I almost got to earlier, which is pay yourself a salary, even if you freelance. Okay. I mentioned this because these are advice I would love to give myself when I was 21 or 22 doing crazy amount of freelance. Because as a freelancer, you get your money sometimes in giant chunks. They don't come in every 2 weeks or something like a full-time job. You get it like at the end of 3 months, you get a giant paycheck. What happens is you want to dilute that down so it's a monthly check that you give to yourself, and anything extra, you put it away and save it. Because especially for someone young and you get a check. I remember when I was like, 21 or 22, I done a project and got a giant check. I think it was like $35,000 or something like that. Imagine you're that young and you get a check for like 35 grand. You're like, okay, let's go buy stuff, right? And it's dumb. It's like, because that's not how money is spent when you freelance. Because maybe for the next 6 months, there's nothing. And that 35 grand now becomes nothing if you have to make a stretch. But being young, I didn't know that. So I was like, okay, let's spend money and let's buy stupid stuff. But if you pay yourself a salary, like, okay, my salary is this much a month and the rest goes into the bank account. You want to save that because just in case freelance dries up, it's seasonal. You have plenty of money to keep you afloat while you wait for the next gig to come in. Okay, so pay yourself a salary. And that way you can also feel very comfortable because freelance is very scary. Okay, if you haven't done it before, you wake up on a Monday, you don't have to go to work. It's a very strange feeling. And sometimes you can feel like no jobs are coming in. Therefore, you're like, oh man, I'm making money. So if you do a project that paid you $35,000 or $60,000, you put that in the bank and every 2 weeks, issue yourself a check. So you feel like you're earning a living. It's very good for morale. So even if you're not doing anything, you're getting a paycheck. So you don't feel like, oh man, there's no freelance, nothing's happening. Oh my goodness, your heart rate starts to go up. It won't happen. Trust me, freelance is really scary like that. Sometimes there's nothing coming in, especially in the beginning when you're just getting your foot in the door. The clients are sporadic. Once you're in it for a few years, it becomes super stable. Okay, other advice here or tips is that there are seasons to freelance, which I just mentioned. Sometimes the season is really hot. For example, right now, February to March, a lot of stuff comes in because it's pre-E3. So you get stacks and stacks of freelance jobs that you can't even handle them because it's too many. And then all of a sudden in like June, everything just stops, right? Because if a game didn't do well at E3 or so forth, maybe everything stops. Or it could go crazy because the game could have won the game of the show or something like that. Now they got to actually finish the game. So now they have to hire 150 people and all of a sudden everything's starting to heat up. If you freelance a lot, you start to pick up these seasons. When I was doing this, I definitely knew when the slow times are coming, when the hot times are coming, and I prepare for that. And you should too as well. So during slow times, I often use that to go on vacations and rest because freelance is super intense. And if you don't do that, you're going to burn yourself out. So I try to take as many vacations as I can during my freelance time, whenever it's slow. So if I know 2 weeks is coming up, nothing's happening, boom, I'm off somewhere. And the vacations really help for a designer as well. Get to see the world and get more visual library into your head. And also set yourself some limits when you do freelance. I was too crazy during my days. I took too many jobs. And looking back, I think I could have reduced it by 30% and still do okay. I just took on way too much freelance and it burns you out. It makes you into a very stressful person for a while. Nowadays, I'm super chill. I no longer take any job, actually. Pretty much just to do my entrepreneur type of stuff and running my film production company. But in terms of freelance, I don't take any anymore because it is a very stressful job. You're always under pressure because freelancers, unlike full-time, you have to deliver all the time. Full-time, you go home at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, you don't have to do anything at home. The company doesn't expect you to do anything. But freelance, because you're being paid per time, you're on a deadline. So they call you on a Friday and they want something on a Monday. You're working the weekend. So it's pretty stressful. Next few tips. 1, invest in yourself and the equipment. Freelancing, because you're working on yourself, you have to have everything that makes the job go smoother. And for me, it was equipment, books, and vacations. I upgraded my computers probably every year or maybe a year and a half. I mean, just brand new computers with everything because speed, especially back then in 2000s, you're not talking about computers today. They weren't that fast. And if you want a fast computer, it could cost you up to about 10 grand or so to get a really fast one. Because even back then, I think SLIs and stuff didn't really even exist. Nor does computer take advantage of that back then. So I was just buying really expensive PCs like box machines and these kind of things. They're very expensive. Or Dell's, they make some couple high-end PCs. But that's important for my work because if my Photoshop is slow, it's got RAM issues and stuff, it's going to slow my work production down. And that's not good when you're freelancing. So I also invested heavily into books. I spent thousands and thousands on books because books give you a lot of visual library, and visual library equals to good design. So if I see a book in a bookstore that I really like, even if it has one image that's going to inspire me for a good piece, I will buy that book. And the third, of course, is vacations. You got to rest. During slow times, I'll take a nice break, and I take vacation out relaxing. I try not to save too much when I'm on vacation. It's kind of like a reward I give myself for working so hard for the last 6 months or so. So invest in yourself. That's important. Okay, if all you do is work, and don't put anything back into yourself, you will probably burn yourself out. Okay, if you're earning a good living, reward yourself once in a while. Okay, next, consider getting yourself a studio space. Well, being a freelancer, you don't have to work anywhere. You can work at home, right? So you could get into the problem where you're starting to work in your underwear. I mean, I was doing that in the early 2000s. It was like getting up in the morning at like 11:30 because you don't have to get to work or anything like that. So you wake up, you eat a cereal in the kitchen, and you sit down at your desk around like 11:30, lunch, you're watching something on TV, and then you start to kick off your freelance jobs. And you're sitting there in your underwear and your pajamas and so forth. And it's not very professional. And that's when I decided, man, this is not good. I'm starting to get into like a slop kind of mentality here. I need to be professional. So getting yourself a studio space allows you to wake up in the morning and have a place to go. And second, it gives you a professional place to meet clients besides Starbucks. Because back in the days, that's all I have to do is like, okay, I got to meet. Let's meet at Starbucks, right? Or you have to go to the film studios or the game studios physically, like Activision and so forth. They're like in UCLA or something. Bad traffic, I have to drive to them because I don't have a place to meet. So once I had a studio, and our studio is located at Wilshire and La Brea. So for those who are in LA, you probably know that. It's right in the smack middle of Hollywood. So the location was very ideal for directors coming from Santa Monica, the west of Los Angeles, to come see us. And it's very good for the animation studios, which are located in Burbank, in the east of Los Angeles. So we put ourselves right in the middle. So as a result, the clients come to us, and we made it really professional looking, made it really clean, and it's like a nice place to have a meeting. So that helps. And you can actually get a couple of friends together to rent one of these places, so you don't have to offset the rent by yourself, right? So it'll help. So yeah, that's one. And the third is that by having a space, you work normal hours. You stop doing the midnight to, I used to work, say, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was doing that for quite a while. And that's just not good, in my opinion, for your health because you start going to sleep at 7 a.m. When the sun comes up is when I went to bed. I wake up at noon or 1, kind of go out, do some chores and stuff, and watch some TV. Like my entire day was just flipped upside down. So having a physical studio allows you to work normal hours. You have to keep a little bit of normal schedule, and that helps with meetings, phone calls, because clients are not on your crazy time. So if I'm doing things like sleeping backwards, sometimes it'll be a pain in the butt because the clients want to have a meeting at 10 in the morning, and I'm like dead tired because I have to stay up for that phone call. So having normal hours helps with that. And lastly, if you can, hire an assistant to help you with things like research, tracking invoices, even buying office equipment. These are things as a freelancer, you got to take this seriously. If this is your income, this is the way you make a living, then do things that can help offset that so you can focus on making the living part. For example, doing research takes a huge amount of time when I was freelancing, like researching the civilizations of the Incas or the Aztecs. Especially back then, there was no Google, which speeds things up. You have to actually go to bookstores. So instead, we sent our researcher, our assistant, to go to the bookstore and just buy a bunch of books on the Mayan civilization or Aztec and so forth. Saves a lot of time. In the meantime, we are designing, we're drawing, and this person is going out there spending their time doing the research. So highly recommend that. And if you're a company, if you're freelancing, you have the overhead money. This is all the reasons why rates for freelancers are higher. These are all things we need to do to build a successful business. So I highly advise on that. Now, a little bit of tips on the full-time thing. If this is your first job, make sure you try to ship a product before you quit, before you leave. And get your name on something. It'll help greatly for your second job. So even the first job, you don't like it, it's a place that you don't want to stay too long. Be patient, stay there, finish that game, make that thing come out. Even if it's a bad product, it doesn't matter. In the business we're in, shipping a product, even if the product sucks, doesn't matter to us too much. We just have to ship products because a product sucks. Sometimes has nothing to do with you as a designer, right? But it does prove that someone believes your designs enough for to actually put it on a shelf somewhere. So that's a big deal. So shipping a game that doesn't do well, sometimes it has nothing to do with you, right? Gameplay, marketing, all sorts of stuff can hurt the product. So we know that. So what we're looking for is, did you stay somewhere and have a product come out? Okay. And if you were to leave a company, leave on good terms. Especially nowadays with competition being so fierce and the number of concept artists, like really good ones, are rare. A lot of studios actually allow you to leave, and they'll actually tell you that if you quit, that's fine. But if you ever want to come back, you're welcome back. We'll give you first priority if you want to come back. Studios offer that because they know that staff get bored sometimes. They want to try other projects. They want to go somewhere else. And instead of doing this thing like, oh, if you quit, we'll never work with you ever again type of mentality, which used to happen when I was around. Like for me, if I leave a company, they don't even put you credit on anything. This is how it was. It's like, we are us, and now you're an outsider. Now you're finding a lot of studios who are way more open to understanding how this business works, especially for creative people who like to bounce around from one studio to another. So you can actually work somewhere and come back. Like Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, they all have these kind of evolving door type of mentality where you can kind of go back and forth, and you're seeing that on the game side as well. Okay, so leave on good terms. That way you could maybe end up in the same studio 3-4 years from now, and instead of junior artist, you're coming back as an art director, for example. Next, don't expect the studios to give you a raise out of nothing. Okay, in the US, they will give you a standardized raise. I think somewhere like 5%, 5 or 8%, something like that. It's standard. But if you want to get a raise, you have to work for it. Okay, especially as a junior artist. Make yourself valuable. And that's the last point I want to make for this entire episode. Money is really governed by how much value you bring. Okay, no one's going to pay you random amounts of high money if they don't get anything back from you. And that's the mentality you have to know going in. And this is something I learned when I was in school, is that I forgot which teacher told me, but they're like, don't chase the money. Instead, chase your skills. Because if your skills and what you could bring to the market is extremely valuable, people will pay for that value. It's the same thing like anything else. If you buy something that's hard to get, something that's rare, the price goes up. So that's the mentality to go into this business with. If you want to freelance, make yourself one of the best freelancers out there. You're on time, you're delivering good stuff, you're always meeting client needs, you're there to take care of their IPs. So therefore, you're valuable. If you're full-time, be one of the best guys on the team. Work and deliver good designs and good quality work. So the studio looks at your stuff, they're like, man, this guy is good. And when you have value, you don't have to worry about raises and getting high rates. They come to you because the studios already know that you are expensive and they're not going to offer you low rates. Okay, so these comes for free. And that's why when I was in school, when I heard that term, don't chase the money, I was a little bit confused. Later, flash forward to today, I totally understand it because I work with freelancers now, right? And if I see someone who's very valuable, I already know the person's operating at a certain rate and I'm not going to offer him something lower. This is just being set up because a person is valuable. Like you try to go get a Ryan Church or something on your project, it's not going to be cheap. Okay, so a guy is very, very valuable. He's a brand that he built up. So for those of you trying to go out there and try to earn a good living on this, don't worry about the money too much. Just make your stuff really, really good and all of it will come to you. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And for those celebrating Chinese New Year's, I wish you a Happy New Year's and Happy Spring Festival. And I'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, this is Fei Zhu signing off. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.